We're going to get started. Bienvenidos a todos. Welcome, everyone. It's so lovely to see you on the last day of this conference, which has been so rich and generative, and on this very early morning. We're going to get started as folks trickle in. I'd like to take a quick moment to share gratitude to the EFIP team, particularly Chanda, for answering all of our million questions and creating such a welcoming and inclusive space for everyone. I'd also like to thank the Mayan land and community that we're on, as well as the people of Mérida for having us, and to all of you for showing up today. Of course, to the incredible activists that are joining us for the panel, and who are here to share their insights and expertise with us, and who have traveled from long distances, 4 countries across 3 regions represented. So we're really excited to get into the conversation with you. I'm Juliana Vélez Uribe from Foundation for a Just Society, and I'm joined today by Prachi Patankar, Rofiat Bello, and Rebecca Reeve, also from FJS in the audience. And of course, joined by Macha Fornin, Pratima Gurung, Daniela Vasquez, and Faith Soning. I'll turn it over to them very quickly so you can hear from them. I just want to share the vision for our time together with you quickly. So today's conversation is about funding to heal our people and planet, collective dreams from Indigenous movement leaders for climate justice, disability justice, and queer liberation. These movement leaders are centering Indigenous feminist ethos in how they organize and create change in their communities and demand structural, systemic, and political change. We hope to unpack these layers a little bit and better understand the challenges and barriers that folks are facing in reaching these collective dreams. We've already been hearing throughout the week about the challenges around unrestricted, flexible, direct funding, around less burdensome applications and reporting. And today, we hope to highlight the need for intersectional funding that takes into account multiple identities and lived realities, and to recognize that by doing so, we might actually move closer towards liberation. So we'll start by hearing from the panelists and then open it up to a collective call to action. We also want to just quickly note that this panel was meant to be intergenerational, and while we have Faith with us representing youth leadership, we did hope to have more youth representation, but folks are facing a lot of barriers, responsibilities, and challenges in their lived context. And so at the end of our panel, we'd like to show a pre-recorded video from Maimouna Ba from Burkina Faso, who was unable to make it in person, but wants to share her very powerful story with you all. So we ask you to stay a few minutes after to watch Maimouna's words and listen to her. And then a last quick note on translation. The panel will mostly take place in English, but Daniela will be speaking in Spanish, so just adjust your headsets accordingly. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Prachi, my colleague, to get us started.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here early in the morning. Thank you again to the EFIP team. It's been great to be here and meet so many incredible activists and funders from around the world. It's my first time at EFIP, so it's been really nice, and first time in Mérida. So thank you to the people in this country and in this region. So we're going to do a round of conversation with our panelists. And just a little bit note as a preface, we wanted to create this panel both kind of to represent a variety of different Indigenous people from different parts of the world, knowing that not all Indigenous people are the same. They come in multitudes. Even within countries, Indigenous populations are not the same, and they're not necessarily placed in the same hierarchies within each of the countries too. And within Indigenous people, not all Indigenous people come in the same, they come in multitudes. They are LGBTQI people, they are women, There are young people, there are people with disabilities, there are people who have different, even within their different classes. And so we wanted to be able to have a conversation that looks at all of the intersections. And so we have somebody here from Nepal, we have somebody here from Thailand, we have somebody here from Kenya, and we have somebody here from Mexico. And even within Nepal, indigenous population, it's 36%, which is a big percentage of the country. And within that indigenous population, there are many different indigenous identities as well. In Thailand, there are also populations that are not recognized as indigenous, or some people don't necessarily recognize themselves as indigenous, right? And so it's a very complex and kind of environment. And so, you know, I would love for all of our panelists to kind of talk a little bit about contextualizing where you are coming from, and why you felt like you needed to form an organization that is so intersectional. What are the struggles that led you to create, you know, for Sangsan, you know, for you, an organization that is LGBTQI and Indigenous, for Nidwan, you know, Indigenous Women's Disability Rights Organization, and for all of you, what led you to that struggle? And talk a little bit about kind of the genesis of your organization and where you are today. So we'll start with, actually, we're going to start with Faith, and then move from there. And the next point will start from Macha.
Good morning, everyone. I'll greet you in my Maasai language. We say Supa. Just say back to me, Supa P. Thank you. So my name is Faith Nataya, and I'm from Kenya. I am Maasai, and we live in the southern region of Kenya, and I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for IPFIP for facilitating my participation here today. So I work with the Indigenous Information Network at its community organization called Olorukoti Resource and Knowledge Center. And I also coordinate a youth organization called Olorukoti Youth Association. So really, Indigenous Information Network, which we say IIN for short, was really started in the same year I was born, so 1996, and really to work with Indigenous women, usually hunter-gatherers in Kenya, who have been going through different challenges, and mostly then our cultural challenges, you know, like especially for women, because that's where a lot of work was started around, working with Indigenous women who have been facing different challenges in the community, like for just being women, for being Maasais, because for our traditions, we weren't allowed to probably own land, to have a say, and in different meetings in the community, for example, we weren't allowed to even sit on a chair while people were talking. Like, women would sit somewhere on the floor, and even getting permission to speak in such spaces was really a problem for them. And also looking at the different climate change impacts that were happening around Indigenous people's lands in Kenya, not being able to access clean water, not being able to grow their food, feed their animals, because we weren't getting any more grass, because there wasn't any more rain. And for us, our animals, our cattle, our goats, they're everything for us. I mean, they're the clothes that we wear then, and there's the food, because in our culture we ate lots of meat, and we drank milk and blood from the same cattle. And this was really important for Indigenous peoples. And so coming up with an organization that tried to incorporate all these challenges and try to help Indigenous women understand who they were, embrace themselves as Indigenous women, and to look at all these challenges and try to improve their livelihoods, to be able to take their children to school, for example, was really important for our organization. So that's where we come from. And with time, we've come to develop different centers for these women that we're working with. And that's really something that we continue to work on. So like for every Indigenous organization that we work with, because they're like diverse, we work with like over 5 Indigenous tribes, different tribes in Kenya. And for each one of them, we have encouraged them to find themselves a piece of land where they can use that as a home for Indigenous women, where they can easily express themselves. They can share their knowledge and experiences and learn from each other. And they've been able to like take this up, and they have developed the centers. They have built their traditional homes there. And this is like a rescue center for them, and for also the youth who are like experiencing other challenges like getting married early and dropping out of school because of poverty. And so this is a very big home for all of us, where we like go learn and meet. So we've been doing a lot of work around that, and lots of work around climate change, and we're trying to also incorporate the youth with everything that we do. I mean, in the recent years, we've done projects around collecting data on climate change, how this is affecting our people, and just getting real experiences of our Indigenous women and youth. And the youth have been the ones to do this, and we're like acknowledging the different challenges the youth are going through, and just helping them to go back home, to learn their language, to learn their community ways of living, to learn our history, to learn our traditions, our songs. And this has been a very big part of it. And we're learning that the community, our parents, they're happy to listen to us and to learn new things from their children. They're putting trust on us, and we're really happy to go back to them and work with them around the different climate change issues, and to, see how we can incorporate the traditional way of monitoring the environment, being able to incorporate the grazing patterns that we used before to our context now. And so there's a lot of learning around that, and intergenerational learning for the youth as well. We're also taking up restoration and revitalization of our traditional foods for our community, and just in a way that doesn't affect the environment. The crops that originally our people did not, we didn't do a lot of farming before because we're pastoralists, but with time we've come to settle in one place, and we have adopted farming. And so we're trying to grow corn the traditional way, the green way, without using fertilizers. And the youth are really helping in training the women and the community how to do this. We are also documenting this traditional knowledge that is tied to climate change for just the youth and the future generations to learn from. We're also trying to train our women on economic empowerment, because we realize if they're economically empowered, they're able to provide food for their children, they're able to take their kids to school, they're also better able to respond to climate change impacts and challenges. And the Indigenous Information Network has helped us to take the youth and the women to different international processes like COP on climate change, and even biodiversity, and others on, for example, on conservation, and they're really learning and bringing this back to the community. And we also have programs where we run different programs on training the youth who are also going to school right now, and we're incorporating climate change into all this. And we're trying to ensure that it's not just a one-person thing. Climate change, biodiversity loss is a whole of society issue, and we're ensuring that everyone is being involved. So thank you very much. I'll stop there now.
I'm the next. Yeah. Hola, muy buenos días a todas, a todos y a todes. Tlanextile monochime, nikan tineme, nikan temeson tlapaloa, neman temeson napaloa. Acabo de decirles que buenos días a todas, a todos y a todes. Les saludo y les abrazo en náhuatl, que es mi lengua materna, es la lengua de muchos pueblos que se hablan aquí en México. Primero quiero agradecer a la Fundación para una Sociedad Justa por invitarme a compartir en este panel junto con mis compañeras y hablar sobre nuestros diferentes trabajos que hacemos cada uno en nuestro país. Daniel Esmeralda son los nombres que he elegido para mí misma y que legalmente me han sido reconocidos en mi nueva acta de nacimiento. Soy lo que podría llamarse ahora en este conocimiento occidental como una mujer trans. ¿Y por qué empiezo hablando de mí? Porque lo personal es político, porque vamos a ver cómo de lo personal llegamos a lo colectivo. Nací en una comunidad indígena que se llama Acatlán. Este es un pequeño pueblo nahua en el estado de Guerrero. Allí, por ejemplo, los roles de género se han tratado de mantener sin muchos cambios durante varios años. Los hombres hacen ciertas tareas, por ejemplo, en las fiestas son los que se encargan de cocinar el pozole, las mujeres son las que se encargan de hacer los tamales y el mole. Y estos roles están muy bien establecidos y no se permite que hombres invadan el campo de las mujeres o viceversa. Entonces, debido a esta rigidez de género, transicionar en una comunidad indígena es una proeza bastante difícil, ya que no hay referencias en Acatlán y en otras comunidades indígenas de México, no hay referencias como en el Istmo de Tehuantepec, que hay personas mushes, como nuestra compañera que nos acompaña el día de hoy, aquí Amaranta, pero en Acatlán y en otras comunidades nahuas no tenemos esas referencias. Entonces no existe un pasado al cual podamos decir, sí, nosotras también existimos y necesitamos ser escuchadas. Entonces, transicionar en una comunidad así, pues es como vivir en un pueblo en un pueblo chico con un infierno grande. Ya que hay todo un entramado de vigilancia de los cuerpos, de los géneros, todo mundo se conoce y entonces de esa vigilancia se sigue la violencia física, el rechazo y algo que se conoce en náhuatl como pinahuistli, que es la vergüenza. A las personas, a las familias les avergüenza tener una hija, un hijo, un hije que sea de la diversidad sexual. Y este pinahuistli, por supuesto, esta vergüenza no solo se queda ahí, sino que la vergüenza tiene una implicación social que lleva a que las familias sean aisladas y que no se les permita participar en estas actividades comunitarias. Así pues, para no ser motivo de vergüenza familiar, tuve que dejar mi hogar a los 15 años para irme a la Ciudad de México y bueno, allá empecé a estudiar y estudié la carrera en Ciencia Política y Relaciones Internacionales en un centro de investigación y bueno, en el año 2013 fundé junto con mi compañera Arivera, que ella había estado en la cárcel, una organización que se llama Almas Cautivas. Almas Cautivas trabaja para la población de la diversidad sexogenérica que está en la cárcel. ¿Y por qué nosotras trabajamos este tema? ¿Y por qué una mujer indígena trabaja este tema? Porque las personas indígenas, cuando hablamos de las personas indígenas, las pensamos situadas en ciertas comunidades con cierto tipo de ropa, siendo de cierta manera. Pero no, las personas indígenas estamos en todos lados y muchas de ellas salimos de nuestros hogares, no por gusto, sino por necesidad, buscando libertad, buscando salir de diferentes opresiones que nos afectan a nuestras vidas y que no nos permiten ser. Y que muchas veces algunas de estas personas que salimos de nuestras comunidades indígenas llegamos a la cárcel. Entonces, defender los derechos de las personas indígenas no solo se tienen que defender en las comunidades, tenemos que defender los derechos también de aquellas personas que han salido de sus comunidades y que están enfrentando diversas problemáticas, como estar en prisión. Entonces, desde el año 2013, nosotras hemos estado trabajando en este tema. Y bueno, para cerrar, yo quisiera leer una frase. Cuando hablamos de las personas de la diversidad, como que no hay una conexión muy clara entre diversidad sexual y personas indígenas. A veces pensamos que una persona solamente es indígena y sin embargo no, nuestras identidades se traslapan, nuestras identidades son múltiples, somos a la vez personas con alguna discapacidad, personas pobres, personas indígenas, personas de la diversidad sexual. Entonces, lo último que quiero decir es que tenemos que traer este tema de las personas de la diversidad sexual a nuestras comunidades. No puede haber liberación, no puede haber libertad política si no hay libertad sexual. No puede haber libertad allí donde se discrimina a las personas por su orientación sexual, allí donde se nos violenta por nuestra identidad o expresión de género. No puede haber libertad en una comunidad indígena si con base en los usos y costumbres se violenta a las personas homosexuales, lesbianas, afeminadas, machorras o trans, aún contraviniendo las normas constitucionales de nuestro país. Además de defender la tierra, la lengua, las tradiciones, las comunidades indígenas necesitan hablar también de ese territorio que es el cuerpo, de sus deseos, de sus múltiples posibilidades, reconocer las diversas opciones para ser y existir, para que algún día podamos todas, todos y todes ser libres e iguales. Muchas gracias.
Good morning, Indigenous greetings, and also the greetings from my mother tongue language in my country, which I say Chazalo to all of you. I'm Pratima Gurung from Nepal, and I represent an organization that works on young Indigenous women with disability. The name of the organization is National Indigenous Disabled Women Association Nepal, and it has a history of why this organization was formed, and I'll be relating to those history and also the realities that we face as an Indigenous women with disability. If you talk to me, my personal identity, I used to work in an Indigenous people's movement as an Indigenous woman long back in 2001. I used to work in the women's movement, and I used to realize that I'm a woman, I'm an Indigenous woman, and I'm also the woman with disability. So looking at back to the social movement, I used to feel myself that I am in the women movement, I am in the Indigenous people's movement, I am in the disability movement. But if you tell me the realities that I used to experience in my day-to-day life was, I felt always in a silence, I was nowhere. So every Indigenous woman with disabilities with multiple identities, either it might be a LGBTIQ communities, it might be a youth or a person with disabilities, has the same experience in all the part of the world. And this is why we are bringing our voices today here in this forum. And I would like to thank IFIP and the Foundation for Just Society for providing this opportunity for us to share our lived experience that we face in our day-to-day lives. So for me, the organization Need One was established after the post-earthquake when young Indigenous women with disabilities were left out from their house because of we had an earthquake. We had to resettle. The people, they were living in the city areas, the house owner compelled them and they put them out of their house because the house was already demolished and devastated. There was no any spaces for them, and they had to struggle where to live. They did not have any food. They did not have any shelter. And for 9 months, these young Indigenous women with disabilities had to live in an open space. And they started living with their disability colleagues and friends with them. And they experienced the forms of violence, discrimination, and abuse from their co-workers, from their colleagues. when I went to those open spaces during 9 months, the young indigenous women with disabilities started sharing me those stories. They had experienced a form of attempt to rape, attempt to violence and abuse. And I asked to them, what should I do? Do you want to go to the police? Do you want to go to the legal mechanism? Do you want to go for the other kind of measures for making your voices? And I got stuck with their answer. They questioned me, what is going to happen to us? Are you going to make us safe? Are you going to provide us our food, shelter, and clothes? Are you going to provide us the social protections that we have? And I had no answer for that. I used to work in a university, and I've been doing research since very long time on this on these marginalized groups. And whenever I went to my village, I found among the indigenous women with disabilities were always limited within the four walls of the house. So that was my one reality. But when I stuck with these realities of these young indigenous women with disabilities, I did not have anything. I had no choice. I did not have I did not want to start any conversation. And later on, I started healing myself and tried to heal themselves. And when I asked to them, what do they want? They said that we are not going to get justice. And I'm going to prove with the data on that. Because none of the women with disabilities, including indigenous women with disabilities around the world, has received justice yet. So they haven't received justice, so what can we do? So the organization Need One was established to unite young indigenous women with disabilities, to share their lived experience, so that becomes a collective voices. That becomes a collective strength and unity to fight against the dominant society. And when I say dominant society, it is within our multiple identities that we hold as ableism, within the gender framework, within the other indigenous peoples movement. We are looking these avenues. And this is how the organizations was been established after the post-earthquake, to unite young indigenous women with disabilities and promote their rights, and also have their accessibility, their access to information in different forums. So I just wanted to, after the organization was been formed, we have been working in different areas. But one of the challenges that we have is lack of data, information, research, and indigenous women with disabilities who are having multiple identities has always remained a challenge and an open reality. And we find this not only within ourselves, we find this among the funders. We find this among the indigenous people's movement. We find this among the women's movement, and we find this within the disability movement. Because if you look at the UN report, that does not include the intersectional identities and their experiences. We are put with a single word, either a person with a disability, either a LGBTIQ community. Does that single word in an entire document give justice to our lived experience? No, I would say no. And this is where we are trying to bring these stories and narratives with all of you, that how difficult is life for us. I myself is representing 1.3 million from my country. I'm representing 54 million indigenous people with disabilities in this forum, who are voiceless still, whose voices are yet to come. And I want my brothers and sisters to come to these forums and have more collective voices with all indigenous people's movement, because our first identity is our indigenous identity. And we are seeking our space within our identities, within our domain, and within our movement. So our struggle is definitely beyond the movement, but still the challenge that if you talk to us is more with our own movement. So for us, we say that the most of the indigenous people with disabilities, if you look at the data, more about 60% indigenous people with disabilities are on employment. In my country, if you see that 50% of the indigenous people with disabilities even do not have their disability card. They do not have citizenship. They do not have other types of services that has been provided by the state. If you look at the data, near about 94% indigenous women and girls are subjected to violence than their counterparts without disabilities. And this data is not simple data. This data is complex, this data is sensitive, and this data has always been invisible. So having the multiple identities, the violence, the aggravated forms of violence has really been complex to Indigenous young girls and women with disabilities. And this is where the organization has been working. When it comes to the climate change issue, we are questioning that who are the most vulnerable group within the climate change. And we see those Indigenous people with disabilities are the most vulnerable group. So we have been working on inclusive education. We have been working on climate change, employment, health, and accessibility. Being an Indigenous people with disabilities, one of the challenges that we face is also about the accessibility. So we have been working on these areas to make our voice to be heard at all the forums. Thank you.
Thank you so much to having me here. My name is Macha Ponin. I form an organization called สร้างสรรค์อนาคตเยาวชน which means empower young Indigenous people to create their own future, which formed 18 years ago. My story is not different from all of our colleagues that talk. And it's time for me to come in here for healing of our struggle for so long. The story started from who I am. My mother had 7 children, and I was born in Thai-Lao border. My first language is Lao. My mother was a farmer, and she was beaten by my fathers, and she decides to break the relationship and divorce when I was 9 years old. We are hungry. Even we have a big piece of the land. And when the government want to build the road, they just build the roads across our land. And we are lost so much land that to make the road accessible to our communities. And we have like 3 big rivers in our regions, which is Khong, Chi, Moon. But my land is very dry. In the rainy season, if the rain not come, we don't have enough rice to eat. And recently, when the rainy season coming, and we have flood for 3 months long, just happening in this year, I have to walk more than 3 kilometers per one route to get the water. And I have to work at the child labor to earn $1 a day so that I can have money to go to school. And when I was 13, I want to go to high school. My mom was told that I have no money to support you to go to school. Why don't you go to the capital city to work? And I kind of understand because we have no school in my village. If I want to go to school, I need to walk 18 kilometers forth and back every day so that I can study. And I also a rape survivor. I was raped by my own brother for more than 10 years. And even I come out later, when the year passed more than 20 years, I was blamed by my own family that they want to protect the rapists and blaming us as the victims of the violence, but we are survived. All of my lived realities push me to committed and passionate about empower young people. I was leave my home similar with our colleague when I was 18 because I want to go to university and none of my family members are supported. And because I also a lesbian. They are ashamed to have a daughter who is a lesbian. They never believe in the woman. They never value our education. But all of that is my strength. I believe in myself. I believe in my community. And I believe in our rights. Therefore, 18 years ago, I went to the school where all Indigenous people in the border came and studied there. All of our Indigenous people still don't have school in the home. And the kid need to stay in the school for 6 to 12 years. There is a lot of human rights violations ongoing. And the first experience that pushed me to create our own programs, our own organization, it started from I arguing the dream of our young people, and all of them just silent to me. I was so shocked that when we arguing like, what you dream about your future, and all of my students don't say anything. And I spent years and years with them until I hear that they want to be a teacher, they want to be a nurse, they want to be a social worker, and that is a commitment that one day when the student came to me and told me that I cannot go high school anymore because I have no money. And I find the scholarship started from 30 up to 300. And within 10 years, we support more than 3,000 young indigenous women. Many of them define as non-gender conforming and also LGBTIQ. 60 of them are complete high school and then went to university. Now, 18 years later, they return home as the change makers. The context where I work is very complex because we are working in Thai-Myanmar borders. All of our people, 50% are being stateless. It's impacted by many factors included in our region, included Thailand and Myanmar. The government do not acknowledge or recognize indigenous people, or are just recognize only ethnicity, which actually not define our right-based approach. And the government in Thailand do not define indigenous people, even they ratify UN DRIP, but they not implement any law to protect our indigenous people. Then conflict make our people are displacement, both internally and externally. The people where we are working with are stateless in Thai side, but their root is in that area. They always ask, like, are you Burmese or are you Thai? But they are indigenous people who are there before the country. And now they're left alone by both countries. And left alone by this world because we are so silent to the armed conflict in the Thai-Myanmar borders. And people there also later on faced the issue of enlarge the national park area, which actually restricted all the human activity. Our people cannot planting rice, cannot feed animal, cannot do anything for 30 years. And when they are being stateless, meaning that you are not allowed to travel, you are not allowed to work, and access to healthcare system and also education is seem impossible because traveling back to the small town, it need to spend at least like nearly 100 USD. Imagine of you don't have any income, but you need to pay 100 USD when you need to give birth. What gonna happen? A lot of our people are faced the issue of well-being, mental health, and we are now hunger, especially during the COVID-19. The people asking what difference between indigenous women and indigenous men or LGBTIQ, we can find that during the COVID-19, when the men are hunger, they find food to putting in your mouth, but the women trying to find food to putting to the mouth of their child and elderly. When they couldn't find any food, they give their own food to the child. Women are more hunger, but at the same time face the sexual violations, face gender-based violence, and our women never allowed to sitting among the men in the village when they're talking about anything related to their rights. And later, after 18 years, we have been established 4 programs in order to address all challenges that our people are facing. We are established the Women's School in order to empower our indigenous people to define our rights. We are established feminist participatory action research that allow our young indigenous people to fighting for their solutions and be a part of the global movement. When talking about right to environmental or right to land, we established economic empowerment, which actually, as you see here, I will explain later. And also we exhibit the gender and social justice. I will tell more story in the second round. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing, all of you. The reality is that Indigenous people across the world, and this we find, FJS supports a lot of different kinds of organizations. In the region that I fund, we support a lot of groups in Myanmar and in Thailand. And, the reality is that people are facing kind of state violence, military violence, being bombarded with bombs and shelling, and Indigenous organizations are formed to, I think minority organizations, and they're formed to create resistance against these state level struggles. But internally, as many we have heard, people face internal issues that are patriarchy, homophobia, gender-based violence that continues. That doesn't stop for many people who are marginalized among the marginalized, right? And so what do you do when you have organizations that are not able to address those internal challenges? What do you do when people who are marginalized among the marginalized are facing homophobia and shame for being disabled, facing violence for being disabled? And this is what happens, right? You have to create your own organization. It's not an ideal thing to do, to have to separate from an organization that you belong to and that you want to be part of. And so I guess the next question is, what should funders be aware of? That you've talked about many of the challenges facing your own communities, facing your own organizations, and how your organizations are addressing those. What should funders be aware of in terms of addressing those challenges? And can you maybe share a little bit about maybe one example of a good thing a funder has done to support and alleviate a challenge, and maybe one thing that funder has not done well, because we need to also learn from the mistakes that we have done as funders that have not been great for our community. So maybe I'll start with Matcha and then we can go that way.
I think actually the answer is like fun intersectionality, because as you hear, Indigenous people are so diversity and we have multiple identity within ourselves and it couldn't divide. Imagine that I need to answer a question again or try to provide the answer again and again. For example, when I joined the Indigenous movement, but the people asking, but you are not considered as the Indigenous? Or if you join the Indigenous movement and Indigenous movement told you that, but you are working on LGBTIQ rights, so you better go to that movement. And then when you join the LGBTIQ movement, they are so happy that we're talking about, marriage equality, we're talking about gender recognition, we're talking about stop bullying at the school, we're talking about, forced marriage because of we are being LGBTQ women, or stop all kind of violation that violates our right based on our sexual orientation and gender identity. We are favored, we are invited to sit and speak about it. And I have repeated speak it again and again. But then when I'm trying to interlink or intersection into the light to land, or when we're talking about disaster that make our Indigenous women or LGBTIQ are, face a lot of sexual harassment or unable to access to the safe spaces, they are kind of, why don't you go back to, Indigenous movement, and so that they address that issue. We are unable to address that issues. Or even like among, feminist movement or women movement, when we are trying to talking about the right of Indigenous women who are faced multiple challenging, might be differences from, the other women who are in different identity. They might say like, wow, better you join like maybe like refugees, because the women that you are talking or speak about, they are, refugees. So I have been kicked around and never be acknowledged in any movements. And that is the reason why we are come to the international level to tone that, After 18 years of working, no one fund us to working on LGBTIQ, women, indigenous, and also human rights. But we always talking about it at very holistic, and everyone just favor to listening the story and empathy and want to support. But in the end of the day, we just get the call funding 2 years ago from FJS. Please clap the hand for FJS. This is the first time. Why it's so important? Because imagine I have been working 18 years. I just increased my salary 2 years ago after 16 years. And we just have 2 staff to do multiple tasks to serve at least 300 people every year. Committed 100 of children who are go to school and they need scholarships without core funding. That make us face a lot of barrier. But on the other hand, when we told the story, we are not safe. Our young indigenous women who fighting in their village and become a leader was threatened by the other leaders who are the men. Our young LGBTIQ who are the leader try to support their community during the COVID-19 was threatened by the local authority. Myself, who I speak out loud about LGBTIQ rights that intersection with indigenous people, I was threatened 6 years ago. My house in the middle of the rice fields, and then the outfit are beside. The people came and burned around my house 6 times in 10 days. And when I went to the police station, the police say I'm not die, they cannot do anything. And I was questioning a lot about, it's not about your work, maybe because of, you are LGBTIQ, or someone say it's not about you are LGBTIQ, maybe because of you are working with vulnerable community, but all of that is couldn't divide. And this is also happened to many human rights defenders that when we are, seek our experience at when the society and community don't have the gender analysis, they try to push the issue of gender violence into the personal issue, and I need to respond that by my own, not our movement responsibility. All of that is the challenging. And what the donor need to be done is that support youth-led organization. I was struggle for 16 years at the youth-led organization, unable to access to the fund. Support intersectionality, support LGBTQ-led organization. We are lack of data. We are hardly to tell a story because we never get enough support that need to be done.
Regarding the challenges that we face due to the multiple identities, I would like to share some of the best practices that has been so far done by the funders. I would highly acknowledge within the feminist movement, the philosophy of intersectionality has embedded, it has started, which is a very good initiative we see. And in some of the funders like FJS and other funders have started working on the multiple identities. But I would again say that those initiatives are not adequate, because when we say that we are working on the most marginalized groups, every identities are complex and every identities have their own lived experiences. And when that multiple identities again compounded in different stories, in different day-to-day realities, the context differs from one individual to another individual. Even if I say that I'm an indigenous woman with disability, the other person who is an indigenous woman with disability will have the distinct experiences. So the experiences varies from one individual to another individual. And the initiatives that the feminist movement and the funders have started working on intersectionality, that is the good practices. And when we say good practices, I would like to also say that the core funding, setting our priorities and agenda according to our needs and priorities has always been a very practical and very important and a very good practice for us. I would like to acknowledge the support of the FJS. I would like to acknowledge the work that FEMI has been doing for the disability inclusion lately. That has really been instrumental to rest of the other reasons that how the intersectionality can be integrated. So within the Indigenous peoples movement, we have been successful bringing Indigenous people with disabilities organization as a membership organization. We are able to bring the disability inclusion policy within the Indigenous peoples movement in Asia region through AIPP, which is a very good example for us. But having said all these good examples, there are many challenges that we face as a right holder. So what funders needs to understand is funders need to understand the diversity of all the movement. This is very crucial. And that diversity is not only mentioning in the paper. If you only mention in the paper, that's it. It's like the UN document for me, which does not transform any single moment of my life, which does not transform any moment of my people. So it doesn't make sense. So we would like the funders to respect the diversity within all the movement, within across the identities. That is the first thing. As Indigenous people, we would say that it is our first identity, because Indigenous identity is our identity when we were in our mother's womb. So the funders cannot say that this is our work that we want. We want to work on accessibility, that is disability. Why don't you work on disability? You cannot say that, okay, we want to work on social protection from a women's perspective. No, we don't want that. We want our identity, the first identity is Indigenous people's identity, and most funders have reluctant with this Indigenous people's identity because it is a political agenda. It comes to land, territories, resources, water, many, many things, and that are interconnected and interlinked. And when it comes to multiple marginalized identities and organizations like us, we have to negotiate because there is a relationship between power. There is a relationship between money. There is a relationship between you are a funder and I am a grassroots organization. That does not need to happen because we are talking about equal partnership. We're talking about contributions that we have made within our family, within our society, and within the country that we are living. The only thing is we need an enabling space to sit on the table, to discuss among ourselves, to set our priorities. And I think donors and funders have to listen to us. If they don't listen to us, it is not going to change the narrative of leaving no one behind. We will be leaving behind until 50 years. It is not going to change the narratives. And when we say that changing the narratives and powers, we're also looking the funders. When it comes to Indigenous people's identity, we really need a collective narratives. We do not want our individual narratives to be framed and to be shaped. As Indigenous people, it is a collective narrative of our Indigenous values and principles that we hold. So I think these are very critical things. When it comes to disability, I would say that accessibility need the support system that we need, that we require as a person with disabilities. Most of the time, the funders say, oh, we want to bring you. You are so fascinating. You speak such a way, but we don't have money for your personal assistant. And that is not justice. We're not begging. It is our right as a person with disabilities, and that has to be ensured by the donors, by the funders, not only in terms of participation in all the engaging process. And this is where we need to sit together, and that can be only possible, as I again reiterate, listening to us, because our stories are distinct from one individual to another individual, from one country to another country. Having these multiple identities, it's very distinct and it's very challenging for us. So we are doing our effort from our collectiveness, from our individual, but one of the challenges that we have is with our government. So the funders' funding has to not only support the organizations like us,
the funders also have to scale up their work, having the negotiation with the government, building key allies relationship with the government. Because if you look at the lens of intersectionality, in my country, no one knows about intersectionality. My constitution does not understand multiple identities. It does not see me as an indigenous woman. It does not see me as a woman with disability. Only it sees as I'm a woman. So we do not see those intersections within the policy makers. So it is important that things have to go parallelly within the movement and within the government. So I would kindly request that the funders also has to scale up their work working with the governments, and it might be in different forms. And this can be only possible by sitting together with us on the table. The last thing that I want to say is, because we're talking about the paradigm shift, and this paradigm shift does not happen only by giving money. This is what I would like to say to the funders. The paradigm shift can only be possible when we are in the governing structures of the funders. If I am in the governing structures of the funders, I can say who to fund, why not to fund. We do not want the funders' landscape and perspectives, because we know that money is important, but sometimes money is not important. Our dignity, right to self-dignity, right to respect of our own individual identity is very much important, and that can be possible, that can be justice to our people when we are in the governing structures within the funders, as an indigenous woman, as a woman with disabilities, as a woman with all the diverse identities. Thank you.
Quiero contarles que en este momento Almas Cautivas está brindando acompañamiento legal a personas trans y a personas de la diversidad que se encuentran en la cárcel. Una de estas personas es una chica que se llama Sandra. Sandra es una persona indígena que salió de Oaxaca y que se fue a vivir a la Ciudad de México para buscar y para tener una mejor calidad de vida, para tener trabajo y para poder desenvolverse. Ella, en uno de esos días en que estaba trabajando, al salir, se encuentra con unas mujeres. Las mujeres le quitan el celular y después estas mujeres son las que la acusan de que ella les robó el celular. Ella entonces llega a la cárcel y el sistema de justicia, para que pueda enfrentar su proceso de privación de la libertad, le pide un domicilio. Ella, como vive en un hotel, no puede comprobar un domicilio y entonces el sistema de justicia le dice, bueno, entonces vas a enfrentar tu proceso legal en la cárcel. Ella lleva 2 meses en la cárcel porque no tiene un domicilio fijo y entonces el sistema de justicia la puso ahí. O sea que te encarcelan por no tener vivienda, por ser una mujer trans que salió de una comunidad indígena buscando una mejor calidad de vida. Eso consideramos que no tiene por qué ser así. Actualmente le estamos brindando apoyo legal y esperamos que pueda salir pronto. Este apoyo legal viene de 2 financiadoras. Una de ellas es Arcus Foundation y otra es el Fondo Internacional Trans. Y quiero mencionar el Fondo Internacional Trans porque es una de las financiadoras que da cierta libertad. Lo que hemos visto es que muchas financiadoras restringen ciertas líneas temáticas con las que se tiene que trabajar. Sin embargo, por ejemplo, con el Fondo Internacional Trans, nosotras podemos definir cuáles son las líneas que queremos trabajar y cuáles son las líneas que nosotras estamos viendo que son necesarias frente a la población que estamos atendiendo. Y creemos que esa libertad que nos da el Fondo Internacional Trans es algo que a lo mejor se debería replicar con otros fondos internacionales para que nosotras podamos trabajar de acuerdo con las necesidades que estamos viendo y no con las líneas que se tienen desde esta mirada muchas veces que sí se corresponde, pero a veces no necesariamente con la realidad. Eso entonces sería como una buena práctica que nosotras vemos de las financiadoras, pero en nuestro ya casi 10 años de trabajo con la población privada de la libertad, hemos pasado por muchas situaciones. Al principio, por ejemplo, para poder nosotras proponer proyectos nos pedían 3 años de existencia. Si no teníamos 3 años de experiencia, no podíamos acceder a fondos. Entonces, eso por supuesto es una limitante. Algunos fondos ya lo están empezando a quitar y ahora piden 1 año o 2 años, pero de cualquier manera, pues en algún momento las personas, las organizaciones requieren tener esa experiencia y entonces se les tiene que dar esa oportunidad a las organizaciones que van empezando. Por otra parte, también los fondos muchas veces no se dan a organizaciones pequeñas. Por ejemplo, nosotras en estos 10 años no hemos podido acceder a fondos mayores a $50,000. Porque las financiadoras que brindan estas cantidades nos piden que nosotras hayamos tenido antes ya ese presupuesto como parte de nuestras operaciones por año. Entonces, ¿cómo vamos a tener nosotras $50,000 si no hay una financiadora que en algún momento nos pueda apoyar? Es una contradicción. Entonces, consideramos que eso, por supuesto, también tendría que modificarse y empezar a darle oportunidad a las organizaciones pequeñas de poder manejar presupuestos grandes para proyectos que sean sostenibles durante cierto tiempo y no proyectos de 6 meses o de 1 año. Bueno, esas son como algunos de los obstáculos. Por supuesto, en México, seguramente ustedes no saben, pero todos los fondos que existían para las organizaciones civiles han desaparecido. Entonces, nuestras únicas opciones son las financiadores internacionales, las embajadas. Sin embargo, algunas embajadas o algunas financiadoras que apoyan a las organizaciones civiles también no hacen de manera sencilla toda esta burocracia para poder acceder a los fondos. Por ejemplo, nosotras nos hemos topado que la parte narrativa puede ser fácil de resolver, sin embargo, la parte del presupuesto parece que necesita una persona súper especializada, un contador o una administradora, y entonces las organizaciones pequeñas tendríamos que destinar dinero para contratar a una persona especializada que sepa diseñar bien ese presupuesto y entonces se pueda someter nuestro proyecto de manera exitosa a un fondo. Entonces eso me parece que también es algo que por ejemplo el Fondo Internacional no lo tiene. O sea, el Fondo Internacional, tú pides la cantidad que necesitas, el fondo lo evalúa y te lo da si considera que lo que estás pidiendo es viable. Sin embargo, en otros tienes que poner hasta el sueldo de la persona que va a ir a comprar, no sé, un papel o a imprimir algo. Y eso, por supuesto, esas formas de trabajo son burocracia que pues no ayuda a nuestras organizaciones y pareciera que le pone ciertas trabas a organizaciones, sobre todo pequeñas, que no contamos con un equipo grande para poder resolver y para poder contratar a todo este tipo de personas. Entonces, consideramos que pues eso también tendrían que tomarlo en cuenta, a lo mejor las financiadoras, si en verdad quieren apoyar a organizaciones que van empezando, porque si no, lo que nosotras vemos es que los fondos siempre se van a las mismas organizaciones que ya tienen experiencia, que son organizaciones muy grandes y que han manejado cantidades muy grandes de dinero. Y sin embargo, las organizaciones pequeñas, muchas empiezan pidiendo a las organizaciones grandes que ellas sean las que pidan el dinero y entonces son intermediarias. Por supuesto, eso nos parece que no tendría que ser así. Hay que darle oportunidad a las organizaciones pequeñas, a las organizaciones que a pesar de que tenemos 10 años, no hemos podido conseguir fondos de más de $50,000. Entonces, esos son temas que me parece que tendríamos que tener en la mesa y tener en la mira. Bueno, eso es lo que yo quiero compartir con ustedes y bueno, esperemos que el futuro de las organizaciones civiles en México es un poco complicado, me imagino que en la mayor parte del mundo, porque nosotras dependemos de estos insumos. Algunas organizaciones están empezando a ser autogestivas y venden bueno, no venden, porque en teoría nosotras no podemos vender lo que las personas hacen, por ejemplo, en la cárcel, pero se pide un apoyo voluntario. Si tú pides un apoyo voluntario, entonces puedes, entre comillas, intercambiar dinero por lo que están haciendo las personas que están en la cárcel. Hay distintas formas de solventar a las organizaciones civiles. Uno de los obstáculos que también nosotras hemos visto con nuestro trabajo es que cuando nosotras les decimos que trabajamos con personas que están en la cárcel, la gente dice, ¿pero por qué yo voy a apoyar a alguien que cometió un delito? ¿Por qué yo voy a apoyar a una persona que está en la cárcel? Yo no puedo apoyar a una persona así. Si está en la cárcel es porque él se lo merece. Nosotras creemos que todas merecemos una segunda oportunidad. Y esas oportunidades también tienen que venir de las financiadoras internacionales para que nosotras podamos hacer este trabajo que al final impacta a las poblaciones más marginalizadas y más vulnerables. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. So much has been shared. I'll just like to say 2 points. One of the challenges that we go through for Africa mostly is that there are so many non-Indigenous organizations that are really taking up funds that are meant for Indigenous peoples. They'd be sitting in this towns, fancy offices, writing fancy proposals, and they will get the funds, and they will report really nicely, but the funds are not meant for them, and so many Indigenous organizations are missing out on these funds that are meant for them and for their actions at the grassroots. And so Iowa, one of our organizations that also FJS is funding, is collecting information and data on Indigenous organizations and what they're doing, and this I hope will be up soon for all the funders to see and just to follow up on which organizations to fund so that only Indigenous peoples get funds for Indigenous people. And one of the good practices that I have seen working with the donors that we do, such as FJS and FEME, is the visits that they do to our organizations. They have come to our organizations, and when they haven't had the time to reach to the communities that are receiving their funding, we've called the communities to Nairobi, and they've spoken to them, so that it's not only us reporting on the success stories, on what we are achieving, but they're also there to tell their own stories, to express what they have learned, and just to listen to their voices. So yesterday, one of the youth spoke in one of the panels, and she said that speak to a youth, speak to a woman, that will really go a long way. So I think that will really change how we do the funding, because when we speak to these organizations, to these communities, we are able to actually understand their issues, and we're able to contextualize our funding so that it fits what they're going through, because these innovations that they are coming up with to solve the challenges that they are going through is really important, and just to make it for them is really great. So that is it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There is so much to learn there, and so much for us to change and shift. I think one of the realizations that we have had, even as FJS, when we were doing a regional scan and trying to figure out how to change our strategy and shift our strategy in a way that actually addresses what people are facing on the ground, we heard over and over again from groups in the region that a lot of funding goes to usually the same organizations, like you guys are saying, the same bigger organizations, but same organizations that are led by dominant caste, dominant indigenous, dominant ethnicity-led groups in those countries, and then it trickles down from there, right? Then it goes to same organizations that are not considering all these intersectionalities and recreating the same challenges over and over again. And then what happens to liberation, right? The organizations are started for that reason, and it's not really creating liberation, right? So it's really important, like Faith has also said, that, you know, we often, when you're talking to the organizations that we're funding, we're also challenging ourselves to ensure that language justice is being practiced every time we talk to an organization. So we're not only talking to the English-speaking people within the organization, not only talking to the EDs within the organization, that we're talking to the young people, we're talking to the members. We can hear directly from people, and then that way our funding is much more nuanced, and funding is based on what people actually need rather than what we think easiest for us to do. So just wanted to say that, but I think we're gonna end here with what actually came from our panelists as a suggestion. We created a set of calls as kind of demands from at least the 4 organizations that are represented here, and they're going to read them to you. And obviously these are not all of them. I'm sure there are many more call to action that actually is needed, but these are some to start with, and we're happy to share with you these calls later. But maybe I'll just start with Faith. You want to start with the first one, and then we can go from there. First 2, yeah.
So number 1, ensure that funders are supporting multitude of leadership within movements, and that funding is reaching emerging and grassroots Indigenous organizations with smaller budgets. When funders seek advice from the leaders of an organization, ensure that you fund the organization too. Don't tokenize and extract, resource their work.
Number 3, consider how Indigenous leadership shows up in movements focused on a variety of political issues. Support Indigenous movements not just on climate justice, but at intersections of disability, LGBTQ2S+, labor, and land rights. Support movements led by Indigenous people for long-term structural and political change.
Support of visibility, access, and travel for Indigenous-led partners in global and regional funding and advocacy spaces. Fund and budget for the meaningful participation of Indigenous women with disabilities in the global spaces, including the support for assistant, accessible accommodation, and others.
Recognize the multiple barriers that Indigenous youth face in gaining visibility and accessing funding and leadership and advocacy opportunities. 8. Practice and fund languages justice. Invest and budget for interpretations and translations of Indigenous languages with your grant-making practice, and in convening, and we also in Thailand, translation in from Thai to Korean and Korean to Burmese.
Thank you all so much, and we hope you let this sit with you, you take it home with you, and we keep referencing both what was shared verbally but what you saw on screen. Like Prachi said, it's a short list, there's much more, but we wanted to leave you with that little piece. Before completely wrapping up, we wanted to make room for Maimouna Ba's video, as I mentioned earlier, from Burkina Faso. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Rebecca to frame it for you all.
Thank you so much, Huli. My name is Rebecca. I also work at FJS on the Francophone West Africa program. A theme that we've been hearing all week in many of the panels is how donor funding requirements and siloing of issue areas exacerbates the barriers that Indigenous peoples, Indigenous youth on the front lines of movements are facing in accessing funding to support their work and needs of their communities. So even before that comes into play, there are also a lot of other contextual challenges that make it difficult for Indigenous youth and those with multiple identities to access spaces like this here at IFIP, where they can meet with other Indigenous activists and connect with donors, including contexts of armed conflict, which is something that Macha and Prachi both mentioned here today. So we wanted to close today by elevating another youth voice, as Huli said, a young woman named Maimouna Ba, who is from the Indigenous Pole community in West Africa. Maimouna wasn't able to travel to come to this conference because she's from an area of northern Burkina Faso that is experiencing active armed conflict at this time. So in this video, she shares her experience and a call to action to support Indigenous communities in the Sahel region at this moment. So we can go ahead and play the video when it's ready. Thank you so much.
And right before we start the video, we just wanted to thank you all for being here and listening, to our incredible speakers for joining us and traveling from so far, and a round of applause for everyone. And we'll start the video now. We know folks might have to leave, so please try to stay. It's really powerful. You can start now. Thank you.
Salutations à tous. C'est pour moi un immense plaisir d'être des vôtres et de vous partager mon expérience. Je m'appelle Maimouna Ba. Je suis originaire du Burkina Faso, qui est un pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest francophone. Je suis issue de la communauté autochtone Peul, une communauté pasteur-éleveur un peu présente partout en Afrique de l'Ouest. Je suis l'actuelle présidente de l'association Femmes pour la dignité du Sahel et j'ai 27 ans. L'association Femmes pour la dignité du Sahel est une association qui s'est donnée pour mission de travailler à améliorer les conditions de vie des populations en posant des actions dans le domaine de l'éducation, en posant des actions pour relever économiquement les femmes, pour promouvoir le leadership et l'engagement communautaire des femmes, pour préserver et protéger l'environnement et la biodiversité, pour promouvoir la santé sexuelle et reproductive, mais également pour lutter contre la situation sécuritaire qui prévaut et promouvoir une justice sociale. Il faut savoir que depuis plusieurs années déjà, le Burkina Faso, mon pays, expérimente une crise sécuritaire sans précédent. Cette crise-là a entraîné le déplacement massif des populations rurales vers les grandes villes où elles espèrent trouver de la sécurité. Cette situation sécuritaire affecte ma communauté sur plusieurs plans. Dans un premier niveau, il y a que c'est cette communauté qui est davantage exposée aux attentats et aux attaques terroristes. En effet, ayant toujours vécu pour et par la brousse, et la brousse étant la zone d'opération militaire où des groupes armés d'un camp et de l'autre s'affrontent, cette communauté se voit devoir fuir leur zone naturelle, leur biotope, et se retrouver en ville, dépourvue. La plupart du temps, lorsqu'elle fuit, elle est obligée de laisser derrière elle tout ce qu'elle avait. Et donc, actuellement, nous avons des centaines de milliers de personnes qui sont déplacées dans les grandes villes et qui n'ont aucun espoir de retourner chez eux et qui, malheureusement, n'ont pu rien prendre lorsqu'elles fuyaient. Elles se retrouvent dans une précarité et dans une vulnérabilité sans précédent. Ça, c'est le premier élément. Ensuite, ma communauté est affectée du fait que, actuellement, il y a eu un amalgame, une volonté quasi de confondre cette communauté-là aux groupes armés terroristes. Plusieurs fois, le ciblage ethnique, les exécutions sommaires ont été exercées sur cette communauté-là du seul fait de son appartenance à cette identité. Par exemple, le 1er janvier 2019, des groupes armés ont fait incursion dans un village de Yirgo. Après leur passage, un autre groupe qui lui est armé et soutenu par l'État, à savoir les Koglubego, a décidé de s'en prendre à la communauté Peul. Ils sont allés dans les villages, ils ont massacré tout le monde, hommes, femmes, enfants. Il y avait une volonté claire de déraciner cette communauté-là et de la faire disparaître. Il y a eu plus de 210 morts dans cette furie-là, tous des Peuls, et malheureusement, jusqu'à présent, justice n'a pas été rendue. Jusqu'à l'instant, les assassins continuent de tourner. Rien ne nous laisse prévoir que les choses dans le futur seront mieux parce que, après Yirgou, on a enregistré plusieurs cas de ces exactions, de ces punitions collectives sur la communauté-là. Le cas le plus récent d'ailleurs ne date que de février 2023, cette année même. À Nouna, des Dozo aussi, qui servent de volontaires pour la défense de la patrie, sont allés attaquer des quartiers Peuls. Ils ont massacré toutes les personnes qu'ils ont trouvées là-bas. Il y a en fait un amalgame clair qui est fait entre les Peuls et les djihadistes. Ça fait que cette communauté se retrouve entre le marteau et l'enclume. Nous posons des actions pour que justice soit rendue non seulement, mais aussi pour créer ou recréer des conditions pour que cette communauté-là se retrouve. Ainsi, nous essayons de scolariser des enfants, de relever économiquement des femmes, mais cela n'est pas suffisant. Et donc, je voudrais lancer un cri de cœur à toutes ces personnes qui sont présentes. Fort malheureusement, c'est un cycle qui, depuis des siècles, continue à victimiser et notre communauté et notre identité. Il faut que ça cesse. Malheureusement, nous n'avons pas le pouvoir de plaidoyer ni de lobbying nécessaire, mais nous avons besoin qu'on sache que actuellement, dans tous les pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, il y a un problème Peul, parce que le cas du Burkina Faso n'est pas un cas isolé. Si autrefois l'humanité s'est indignée parce que des injustices étaient commises sur la communauté juive, alors je pense qu'il y a encore de quoi joindre nos voix et tourner le regard vers la direction de la communauté Peul. Nous avons souffert depuis trop longtemps. Nos parents, nos grands-parents ont souffert de cette situation. À chaque fois qu'il y a des intérêts géopolitiques dans cette zone, c'est toujours nous qui nous retrouvons entre le marteau et l'enclume. C'est toujours nous qui sommes obligés de perdre en vie de façon carrément injuste. Et ça ne peut pas continuer comme ça. Il faut une solution définitive. Vous qui êtes là et qui avez la voix et qui avez le pouvoir de porter des plaidoyers et de faire des lobbying, nous vous prions de vous joindre à nous et de nous créer des opportunités. Je voudrais vraiment du fond du cœur remercier les personnes qui ont créé ce cadre et qui nous permettent de venir nous exprimer. Parce qu'il y a certaines personnes qui ne savent pas que tout ceci existe dans le monde. J'en appelle à votre humanité. J'en appelle à votre amour pour la justice. Il faut que nous agissions ensemble pour préserver cette communauté qui, en elle-même, est un patrimoine humain au regard de sa culture, au regard de son mode de vie. Nous voulons que vous nous souteniez financièrement, matériellement. Nous voulons que vous joigniez vos voix à la nôtre pour faire entendre notre réalité à l'humanité et pour que à jamais nous parvenions à mettre fin à cette injustice et à ce cercle vicieux-là.
I'm sorry, I couldn't tell the story if some of you interest. This is come from our indigenous community. The women are create these kind of products and we would like to selling it and the women want to use this budget to create the center so the women can gather together and this business belonging to LBQT youth who are indigenous and also state-led indigenous people. So please come. It's only 6 pieces. Yeah. Okay. And before we leaving, I would like to ask all of you to chanting together when I asking, tell me how indigenous human rights defender look like, and you're pointing to yourself and saying that this is how the indigenous human rights defender look like. And when I chanting how feminist human rights defender look like, you're pointing to yourself, this is how the feminist human rights defender look like. All right, are you ready? Okay, tell me how the indigenous human rights defender look like. This is how the indigenous human rights defender look like. Tell me how the feminist human rights defender look like. This is how the feminist human rights defender look like. Tell me how LGBTIQ human rights defender look like. This is how the human rights defender look like. Thank you so much. Yeah, please come to see our things. Thank you so much.